Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 300 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. On this bonus episode of the show, we'll be hanging out and chatting with some of our longtime listeners, sort of like we did back in episode 200, and generally just celebrating the fact that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy has somehow managed to last for 300 episodes. And if you want to know more about the history of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy and how it all got started, you should go check out our conversation about that back in episode 100. And so today on the show, we've got our producer, John Joseph Adams, along with longtime listeners Jesse Colton, Tyler Lutz, Crissy Lutz, and Juhan Raud. And so let's start with Jesse, and have you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started listening to Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Okay, so hi, my name's Jesse. I discovered the show, I think it was when I was, on my first big atheism kick, and I was reading lots of Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, and whenever I discover someone that I like, I usually go on iTunes and just look for interviews with them, and, I think that was how I first discovered the show, was the interview with Richard Dawkins. And from there, I just looked through the list and saw that, like, every other episode was someone I liked, and ended up just listening to half the episodes that had been recorded up to that point. And since then, I've discovered a lot of new things through the show.
Well, yeah, that's really cool because, I mean, I've said that Richard Dawkins and George R. R. Martin were two of the people I was most excited to interview. So, and that was one of the things that really, you know, for a while it was touch and go whether the show was going to keep going back in the early days. And after I interviewed... Well,
and you finally got your white whale, Neil Gaiman.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. That's one thing that's happened since episode 200 is we finally got Neil Gaiman on the show.
So all that's left is Stephen King now.
Yeah, man. Well, maybe by episode 400, we'll be able to record Stephen King. Although I don't know. I actually reached out to Owen King about he and Stephen King wrote a book together recently, and we didn't get any response from him. So I think maybe if we can get Owen King, that would be a good first step. I don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah, we did have Joe Hill though. That's pretty adjacent.
Yeah, well, we've had Joe Hill
close.
Twice, actually, yeah.
Oh, right, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, because he was on The Best American.
Oh, wow. See, I was actually going to ask you if there had been any repeat guests, because when I was looking through the guest list, I didn't really see very many repeats.
Well, yeah, so we have a policy about not doing repeat feature interviews, but sometimes people come back on panels, or people who have been on panels, and then we do a feature interview or something. Probably at some point we'll start repeating feature interviews. I really want to talk to Kim Stanley Robinson again about some of the books that have come out since we talked to him. But so far, I'm trying to keep it like I want it to be kind of like Geek's Guide to the Galaxy, like a guide where there's an entry for each topic or person or whatever. So it's not just so if you have the same person over and over again, it kind of defeats the purpose of that.
That makes sense.
But,
so when we publish the 8,000-page book version, we won't have to excise anything. It'll all be fresh.
Yeah, we'll crowdfund that. All right, cool. So Jesse, anything else you want to say about? So that was you started listening. How long have you been listening? When did you discover the Richard Dawkins interview?
Let's see. It's 2018, so I probably started in 2014. So it's been 4 years that I've been listening now.
Wow.
And at first, I avoided the panel episodes because I just wanted to listen to the interviews, and now that I've listened to them, they're my favorites.
Okay, cool.
I actually, Geek's Guide is what I play when I go to the gym. I don't like listening to music because I fiddle with my phone too much, so I listen to either podcasts or audiobooks. So now, as a result, every time I turn on Geek's Guide, it reminds me that I need to go to the gym that day, so you're helping me stay healthy, too.
So
awesome.
So you just get really psyched up. You're just like, science! Atheism!
I'm just really excited about all this nerd stuff. And I've discovered a lot of things through the show, too, especially other podcasts. Tolkien Professor, I discovered through your show, and I went through and I listened to, like, every single episode where they went chapter by chapter through The Lord of the Rings. And that was all I listened to for, like, a month or two, and I got super into Lord of the Rings.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah. All right. So how about Tyler? Tell us a bit about yourself and how you started listening to Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah. So I grew up here in San Antonio, Texas. Kind of funny side note, you had a gentleman, Zach Chapman, on your 200th episode.
Yep.
And I think he said he was from Austin, and he kind of trash talked San Antonio a little bit. So I feel like I have to defend it now. But yeah, so I think it's been 8 years since you guys started?
Yep, 2010.
Something like that. Yeah. So I think it was because I read The Wind-Up Girl by Paolo Bacigalupi, and that was like one of your first episodes. I was just kind of looking for interviews with him, and then just kind of followed from there. And then, of course, John was putting out short story anthologies, and I just kind of really got into short stories. So got into like Starship Sofa, Drabblecast, Escape Pod, things like that. And I think, Dave, that's where I actually heard the Cats in Victory was on the Starship Sofa podcast.
Yeah. So that's a story. So that's kind of a funny story because when I was a kid, I had a picture books. I mean, like 4 years old or something. I had a picture book series called Cats in Victory. And at the time, I didn't even know what the word victory meant. I just thought it sounded cool. And so Cats in Victory doesn't make a whole lot of sense, just like grammatically or whatever. But I always liked the title. So in my late 20s, I did a sort of a new version of it where I used that title, and it's kind of my riff on Thundercats. And and there's like, if you know Thundercats and you read the story, there's some pretty obvious like little references in it there to it. But John was kind enough to publish that story.
In issue 1 of Lightspeed.
Issue 1 of Lightspeed magazine, yeah.
Yeah, so. I loved it. It was great. But yeah, so I became a library assistant at one of our local libraries and started a science fiction book group called Escape the Earth. And I would pick books, and then we had these little like pieces of paper that we could put QR codes on and put them on the shelves so people could just walk by and like do the QR code reader, and it would pull up like an interview with an author. So I would put your podcast as the QR code for like some book we were reading that corresponded with the author. So I forced all of my book group readers to listen to Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Whether or not it worked, I don't know.
Yeah, we gotta recruit more librarians to do that.
Yeah. A few of them told me like that was a great interview with so and so. We read Alistair Reynolds one day, and that was one of the interviews you did. So we talked about that a little bit.
He even had Alistair Reynolds went to the library, didn't he?
Yeah, he actually came and did a reading. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
and I mean he lives in the UK, so it's not like he was just like nearby or anything.
Yeah, he was here for I think it was WorldCon.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but John, San Antonio is like the mecca of the world. I mean, everyone knows it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I was actually just there. Tyler, I didn't meet you when I was there, did I? Or
yeah, I actually gave you some books. I went to your reading.
Right. Okay.
You were a lot taller than I thought you would be.
Well, Tyler, you're really tall, aren't you? I mean, I haven't met you. I've just seen your Facebook.
You've been stalking me.
He's tall.
No, I'm like 5'11",
John is taller than we think he is. David is like more ripped than anyone thought he would be.
Well, apparently you should have seen him when he was in high school. He was like Rambo.
Oh man.
Yeah, I think I'm quite proud of myself. That I feel like I'm the most ripped person around who has never been to a gym in the last 20 years.
So I think for bonus content for the podcast, you need to post some pics.
Yeah. That's how
Some
we're going to boost the Patreon count.
Yeah.
I would up my pledge if there were shirtless selfies.
All right. See, this is why we have these episodes. So we find out what the listeners want.
Yeah, find out what really is really in the hidden heart of all of our listeners. It's like, oh, that's what they want. Okay, got it.
More flesh.
Well, we thought it was David's like intelligence and his good interviewing skills, but really this whole time it was just his sex appeal that had us listening.
Okay, so moving on. So Crissy, tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm Tyler's wife. That's how I got into the podcast. We've listened to it, I mean, for years now. It was the first podcast. We listened to it on the way to our honeymoon after our wedding. So it was the first podcast we ever listened to as a married couple. But I don't read as much as Tyler does. I'm more of a sci-fi movie person, and then I do costuming mostly, so I always real naggy and paying attention to every costume that comes across any screen and watching it, and how can I make that, and who's going to ask for it, and what can I wear that to? So that's pretty much me. I just sew and watch movies.
I mean, I don't know. You used to have a business, or maybe you still do, called Nerd Alert, where it was like...
I did. It was myself, my sister, and 2 of our girlfriends, and basically we just, I mean, when you're a girl and you like science fiction and fantasy, 10 years ago, there weren't a whole lot of options besides t-shirts, and I'm not a t-shirt person, so we started making vintage-styled cocktail dresses, but just with different movie prints, basically. So lots of Star Wars dresses. We'd buy old, vintage bed sheets and turn them into really nice dresses, but we just got a little too big for our britches, so we just kind of disbanded, and now I've got a new, I guess, project / website I do called Circle of Mars, and it's basically, I'd say mostly tutorials on how to make all the stuff that I make, because I know when I started out doing it, I'm a lot more ambitious than I am practical, so I'm always 100% sure that I can make something, and then I'll spend a week trying to figure out how to actually do it, and I know I'm not the only person like that, so I just want to put up any kind of explanation that I can for different things. So there's different ways to do printmaking, different ways to sew finishing on clothes, different ways to draft patterns, all kinds of crafting stuff. I just started using Warbler for the first time, and I know that's what a lot of cosplayers use for building armor and stuff like that. So it's not quite what I'm using it for, but it's a stepping stone.
That stuff seems pretty cool. I've seen it on Cosplay Melee, and I think maybe they use it on Face Off occasionally too. I mean, obviously Face Off is more about the face makeup, but
yeah, when she told me about it, I thought she said war blood, and I was like, you're so brutal.
Hell yeah.
Cosplaying is a very brutal industry.
So, Crissy, when you say that you got too big for your britches, what actually happened? What do you mean? What happened?
We had 4 people in our company, and I made everything. I work now in clothing manufacturing for my regular 9-to-5 job, and if I knew then that you could hire someone else to do it for you for a low price, I definitely would have done that. But I was working full-time and trying to sew full-time, and it just wasn't quite it. But we got to do a couple of cool stuff. I made a Chloe Dykstra dress for an episode of Epic Mealtime, and we got to meet a ton of different celebrities, and we went to tons of conventions, so it was a great experience for sure.
You were featured on IO9.
Yeah, we got on IO9, on Gizmodo, I mean, every website, before I even fully could comprehend how neat it was. I think I was just like, what?
So those celebrity connections, how did that happen? Did somebody reach out to you, or did you meet somebody at a convention, or?
Mostly just people reaching out. It was always very, I mean, I still, every now and then, someone will come up and be like, hey, you're Crissy, right? And I don't know how to correctly accept the fact that, hey, I'm constantly putting myself on the internet, so of course it's going to happen, but my immediate reaction is always to scream stalker in their face and how do you know? But it's fun, and it's always really cool to be acknowledged for something that you do. I'm sure you guys know. I mean, you've gotten recognized.
Probably not as much as you, to be honest.
You probably handle it a lot better, though.
Well, Dave, if you went to a convention, I bet it would happen a lot. Just there would be lots of fans who would, walk by you and be like, oh my god, it's David Barr Kirtley!
Yeah.
They would at least have to hear your voice. If they didn't recognize you, then once you started talking, people would just start flocking around.
Yep.
Well, and, at a convention, you're always going to have, a name badge on, and so, it might be one of those things where, even if they don't necessarily see him, they might happen to see his name out of the corner of their eye and then, freak out,
Well, it's funny because for years and years, I don't know if this still happens so much anymore, but everyone would describe Geek's Guide to the Galaxy as John Joseph Adams' podcast, editor of The Living Dead, and some other guy.
No. Oh, no.
Oh, that's terrible.
But I don't know. Now that I've been the full-time host for 200 episodes, maybe maybe people know who I am.
John works from the shadows now. John is the puppet master that makes the strings.
I'm kind of a half-assed puppet master, to be honest.
We have always gotten a lot of joy out of the introduction, and when it would go, John Joseph Adams and David Barr Kirtley.
Oh, yeah.
Our favorite thing to shout at each
other. Who is that guy, by the way?
Yeah.
John, this
the voice?
Jack.
Yeah, who does the introduction?
Who is the guy who does the opening narration?
John,
it's this guy named Jack Kincaid.
Jack Kincaid or someone?
Yeah, Jack Kincaid. Yeah, like if anybody listens to the Nightmare podcast, he does the introductions to those too, and I think he's also the person that says Lightspeed on the Lightspeed podcast. You know, where the little intro part right at the beginning. But he's just a guy. That's a very weird random connection that I made like years and years ago. Like this was back in MySpace days. I mean, I never really was on MySpace too much, but I did have a profile there, and occasionally I would poke around on it. And I never really ever met anybody or anything. It's like, oh, well, there's a lot of bands on there and stuff, and so I would go and listen to music and just check out what they were doing on there. But he
it
like
was
randomly,
a different time.
He randomly reached out to me on there just because of like whatever interests I had listed. It's like, and he's into similar music as I am, so like it's part of why he reached out, and we just became friends. And then turned out he did all this voice acting stuff and all that kind of stuff, and so yeah, that's how that came about. And then when
I do have to say,
Geek Guide, yeah, go ahead.
I really appreciate that the opening intro used to be like a full minute long, and now it's only like 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, because John set that all up. I've never actually met Jack, although I'm grateful to him for doing it. But when the first thing he sent was like 5 minutes. The first intro music was like 5 minutes long, and I was like, "Can we get this down to like a minute or something?" And then it's I think been cut down even more since then. Which is too bad because it's kind of a nice piece of music that he did for us, but people want to get into the show.
Mm-hmm.
I like it at the end. I think it works really well as an outro.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and I also want to get our other panelist in here. So, Juhan, Raud, tell us a bit about yourself.
All right, so I'm from Estonia, Tallinn, and I've basically been a science fiction and fantasy fan all my life. So I don't know. Started listening to the show basically in the since the beginning. I mean, the early days, but kind of done it less and less in the most recent years. But yeah, back in the beginning, I mean, everybody was sort of waiting for a Dance with Dragons, right? So so there was this promise of maybe there's gonna be an interview with George, so I was impatiently waiting for that, and then listen to all of the podcasts, and then you guys moved, I think, switched platforms, and then eventually you got to George, but then I was hooked already, but then yeah, I mean recently, so I've been listening to if there's somebody that I really like or I'm interested in, then I'll check out a specific show. But I mean, yeah, but it's been more a bit more difficult to listen regularly now because of everyday stuff. But
it sounds like you're really busy. This is the only day that you can do this in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So.
Just call him out on air, Dave.
Sorry?
So what do you do that's keeping you so busy?
Well, I'm journalist, and also I give lectures.
He's a spy. That's what he's not saying.
Yeah, I'm a master spy, and I give lectures on philosophy and critical thinking sometimes. So yeah, but like I said, I mean, a lifelong fan of science fiction and fantasy and horror, and it's really cool to be on the show.
So what is the fantasy and science fiction scene like in Estonia?
I mean, the local scene is pretty small, but I think it exists. But usually it's because of the internet, everyone's so international anyway. So we pretty much read all the authors in the original language, which means English, so on, and there are some local cons, but they're sort of small, but we have had notable guests. I wasn't in that con, but we had Bruce Sterling 1 year.
Well, and you went to Worldscon, right? I think I saw on Facebook.
Yeah, I did. So the one that was in Helsinki, pretty near, just took the ferry to Finland, and there it was. So I mean, yeah, that was amazing. I mean, saw all my favorite authors. Took a special, like a bag full of books, just to get them all signed. And I'm kind of proud to say I did get them all signed. So I mean, that was kind of amazing too. But just to see living legends like Bob Silverberg or George R. R. Martin or well, actually I'd seen George once before in 2009 when he was also guest of honor at the FinCon. So that was like pre Game of Thrones day, so he was sort of not that super duper celebrity
before
that he
the
is
TV
now.
show.
Yeah, but I mean, Ice and Fire is the books. So I call it, Game of Thrones is the show. So yeah, before the TV show or HBO show. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting when you're talking about George R. R. Martin, because I was such a huge George R. R. Martin fan. When we started this podcast, he's one of the main people I wanted to interview. And I would spend hours every day on this Song of Ice and Fire message board and stuff like that. Then when the TV show came out, me and
didn't you rewrite Game of Thrones by hand or something?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, a couple of times. Yeah, that's impressive, I have to say.
Yeah, trying to absorb his magic.
I think he said that the exercise is to take a book that you really like their style and you want to learn from it, and then write it all out by hand, and just it'll make a connection in your brain with how they write, and it'll help you become a better writer.
Yeah, so actually I talked about
this. I think that's an amazing idea.
A lot in episode 200, so if anyone's curious about that, I don't want to sort of reiterate all that stuff, but yeah. But I do want to say, I mean, it's kind of too bad, because when the TV show came out, it started passing the books, and so I didn't want to watch the show, and neither did Douglas Cohen or I think Chris Vasquez, a bunch of our friends, and so George R. R. Martin was such a huge central part of my life, and the TV show kind of made it so that I'm sort of disconnected from that. Still waiting for the next book to come out before I watch the
as
show.
are we all.
I have a confession to make, which is that I've never seen or read Game of Thrones at all.
Oh no!
Get out!
I know, I'm done. Bye, guys.
Shut up,
somehow have avoided it all this time.
No,
but what's funny is I've listened to all the Game of Thrones panels and been intensely interested in everything you're saying, even though I have no idea what's going on. It's just so entertaining to listen to people talking about the story.
Because we're passionate, right? So it's
yes, exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, I also haven't I've actually like made efforts to not watch the show at all. I mean, so I'm like books only. So because here's my reasoning for that. When the first trailers started coming out, or like George was like putting on hints about casting and so on his Not a Blog and so on. I don't remember what year it was, maybe 2010 or something. So eventually, like for the first trailers, teaser trailers or whatever for the first season were coming out, and I was super excited. I mean, like everyone else, but then I noticed something weird, which was that when I went back to the book, like just rereading it for pleasure, the bits that were like featured in the trailer were, what I was seeing parts from the trailer or the teaser. So whenever I would read something that was not in the trailer, that would be my own imagination, right? So that would be like the character, how I imagined them. So then I would, come to this, bit that was, featured in the teaser trailer, and that would be like Peter Dinklage instead of Tyrion, So I quickly realized that, oh no, if I watch the whole season and it's done very, faithfully, or very well, it doesn't matter. I mean, the show is going to overwrite my imagination. I'm going to lose my connection with those characters that only I have, and it's going to be replaced by these, wonderful actors who I'm sure do a, remarkable job, but it's going to be, this thing from this industry, right? So I want to, I want my own connection with these characters as I see them. So I made this decision really quickly to just avoid the show, and now it's turned into this very weird, interesting conundrum. I mean, where it's I'm not sure like what. I can only imagine how George feels about it. I don't know. I don't want to speculate, but it's strange that it's kind of like it's like an adaptation of a thing that's not yet written, and it's kind of its own thing. That's what everybody keeps saying. The show is the show, the books are the books, but it's like, what's the relationship between them? Is it like authorized fan fiction now, because they're basically making things up, as they go along, but they're sort of like basing it on what George said, so nobody can be sure. It's very strange and weird, very weird. Well, with Game of Thrones, I feel like there's so many characters, it might help new readers just to kind of make that connection. I know when I read the first book, I had to tape a family tree to the to the front cover just to keep track of all of it.
We've definitely watched every episode, and then usually rewatch them before the next season comes out.
Yeah. All right, and so for you people who've watched the show, just don't give me any spoilers for the show. I don't want to know. And let me just like talk about the pain of trying to avoid Game of Thrones spoilers in the current cultural milieu. So I was watching it was an ad for internet service, and there was a huge Game of Thrones spoiler in the ad for internet service. It's like you cannot avoid it.
There was a huge spoiler in the Hugo ceremony as well, when they were basically just showing clips of the nominated like best TV episode things, and then there were like the most dramatic scene from that super cool episode, and you're like, that hasn't happened yet, as far as I'm concerned.
Avoiding Game of Thrones spoilers is like trying to avoid Star Wars spoilers. It's just impossible.
Yeah, with the Hugos thing is like, I always hate that they do that, because it's like, well, the entire Hugo Awards is basically centered around books except for the 2 categories. And yet, for all of the dramatic categories, it's like they spend like 10 minutes showing trailers or little snippets of the nominated things. Whereas for the books, we don't get any snippets of the books. It's like, ostensibly, this is all about the books. And also we give a little bit of nods to some of the media stuff. But it's like, then we spend all this time putting these clips on screen where it's like, yeah, we know what that is. Like, but you don't need to show us that. This isn't the Oscars.
They're trying to turn it into the Oscars.
Yeah,
but
they wish.
To be fair, like, I mean, the last Hugo ceremony in Finland was like just amazing. So
was it?
You know, yeah,
I didn't go, so I didn't. Yeah, so it was really good. Though.
It was, it really was. I mean, Karen Lord was the Toastmasteress, and she was fantastic. I mean, I hadn't read any of her work, but like after that ceremony, I went straight to the bookstore and bought a book, so like that was incredible. Yeah. And it was just a like an incredible feeling of, being in that same room when, like Ursula K. Le Guin, who, has like, won a Hugo, and we got to hear a speech that she'd prepared especially for this occasion. So it was like a magical moment. So yeah, but I agree though with the showing of the clips. I mean, it's kind of spoilerish, but just the ceremony itself was the Hugo ceremony was amazing. Yeah.
I mean, so Tyler, you were mentioning that you met John recently and you were having him sign some books or something. Do you go to a lot of book events like that?
No, I was actually working the event, and everyone that pays a membership gets a bag full of books. So, I try to go to as many of those events as I can, specifically the literary ones, because the panels are just incredible. I love hearing my favorite panels at those things are the Texas Weird panels. So you get all these like old weird hippie dudes from like the 60s, 70s, and 80s just regaling stories about each other and how weird they are, and just like all these like weird fiction that they've been writing. So like Joe Lansdale, Scott Cupp. I know Michael Moorcock gets looped in there, and I think George Martin actually grew up with some of those guys, or at least he knows them very well. But I just love hearing those stories because those guys are just nuts.
And so, sorry, what capacity are you working the events in?
Oh, I was working the World Fantasy Convention because we have a cousin that's on the board that does the Lone Star Cons every year. And Lone Star Con was chosen to take over the World Fantasy Convention for San Antonio. And so we were just at like Thanksgiving, I think, one year. And our cousin Robert was like, Tyler, you want to help me out at the World Fantasy Convention? And I was like, yeah. So it was just super neat. And that was an interesting con because it was mainly just industry folks. There weren't a lot of fans there. So it was really cool to meet all those people.
So what percentage of your time at the con is you working versus you getting to go enjoy the con?
So I told Robert, I was like, I will work, as much as you want me to, but I have to see a few of these panels. And he was like, oh, no worries. Like, you just go, kind of go see whatever you want. And whenever you can help out, we would appreciate it. So he kind of gave me free reign to go and see whatever I wanted. So I was pretty fortunate to get that gig.
And Crissy, you do go along to a lot of these or not?
I go to some of them. That one I definitely wasn't allowed to, just because it was a members only kind of thing.
And they don't allow costumes at that con, unfortunately.
Yeah.
If I have any excuse to make an outfit for something, I'm going to take it. So if I can't even go, then I'm just going to pout. I'll make a pouting outfit. But,
yeah, it was a funny story. I know Juhan mentioned Bruce Sterling coming out to Estonia. We actually got to go to his family's house and see his baby picture.
It's my best friend's. My best friend's uncle, and Tyler's for years been like, is he going to be there? Like any family function that she invites us to, he's like, is Bruce going to be there? And she's like, no, he doesn't live here. Stop being weird.
I have high hopes.
So what did his baby pictures look like?
Adorable.
Did he have like mirror shades on?
Oh yeah, no, yeah, a Skiz Matrix tattoo across his neck.
But I try to go to as many with Tyler as I can. When he was still working at the library, George R. R. Martin came to, I can't remember what the convention was, but he had donated cases and cases of Game of Thrones books to the library. So Tyler went up to thank him for it, and I got to go with him. And he just kind of looked at Tyler. He's like, "I don't want to see these in a pawn shop." I think he signed a bunch of them too.
Yeah,
but it was really cool.
Yeah, we found out later he had no idea that the books were donated. It was all his wife.
Kind of bombarded him.
Yeah,
but it's always fun. It's always, like I said, just to see like the people that you admire in person is always just.
Yeah,
remarkable.
And like I was saying, like the literary cons, like the panels are just amazing. Like I know Paolo Bacigalupi was on a panel where they were talking about ecological issues that are going to be happening in the future, and just like drawing on some of the short stories that he's written. And so you have like authors and scientists like in the same panel, and it was just super cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And so, John, I wanted to give you a chance. You want to give us an update on what you've been up to?
Oh, well, just been really busy, editing novels and everything, trying to keep up. It's been an entirely, different thing than working on short stories. But, just to give you a sense of how busy I am, yesterday I got up at 6:30 and I started working then, after some coffee, and then I stopped working at 10:30 at night. I had some breaks during the day. I ate lunch and dinner and stuff, and I also walked 12 miles on my treadmill.
Jesus,
because I have my treadmill desk set up, so I was working while I was walking while I was working.
That's awesome.
Smart.
So I got a lot of work done yesterday.
Well, so John, is there anything you've done lately where people could support you financially on the internet?
Oh, yes, and as a matter of fact, yes. I launched a Patreon and a Drip. Drip is Kickstarter's answer to Patreon. It's basically the same thing. So if anybody wants to support all the things that I do, Lightspeed and Nightmare and all my different other editorial projects, you can chip in $1 or $2 a month or whatever, that kind of thing. And so either on Patreon or Drip, and if you just look for my name, you can find the pages easily enough. Thanks for the nudge, Dave. It's still new to me, so it's like I forget that I have to promote that thing.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, John has done so much for fantasy and science fiction and for new writers and all these magazines and anthologies, and he's worked on Geek's Guide to the Galaxy for about 8 years without getting paid. So I mean, people, if you want to support John, he deserves it so much, and I would just really strongly encourage people to.
He does.
Aw, thank you, Dave.
I think I realized how actually well-known John kind of has become when I went in the bookstore and I saw his name on 3 different anthologies, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's the guy."
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. Now John's he's made it big time.
I do wonder, David. David, do you ever plan on releasing a book of any of your short fiction or anything?
Mm-hmm.
I'd be happy to. I mean, at this point, I haven't written any new stories for a number of years, and publishers generally are not super interested in short story collections. I mean, if anyone wants to.
It's too bad you don't know anyone important who works in the publishing industry who might also be on this call.
Right. What he's saying is true, though. Collections are a hard sell, and it's so basically, I've tried to acquire, a collection, since I started my imprint, and I have to get authorization for everything that I buy. So, it's I have a boss, so, I don't just have carte blanche to do whatever I want. And so, So basically, it's like they would have let me buy it, but they wanted a promise from the author to also write a novel, to sell us a novel also that they hadn't written yet. And so it's like, but the author wasn't really comfortable with that because like they weren't sure if they were going to write a novel or how long it was going to take them to write one, and they didn't want the pressure of that. So,
but why are short stories a hard sell? I mean, just like complete naivety here. I genuinely don't know.
Right. I mean, so anthologies and collections, collections being single author collection, so all the stories by the same person. Collections and anthologies have different challenges. Anthologies and there's all this institutional knowledge in publishing that just tells them that anthologies and collections don't sell. And it's really hard to fight against that, whether, I mean, it's true in some cases, but I mean, a lot of times it's, because because they don't really understand how to promote them or how to, get people interested in them in the way that they can get them interested in a novel. But then you see collections like Carmen Maria Machado's collection that came out. It's like all over the place. It's like getting nominated for every like major literary award, not even just genre awards, but like, National Book Award and stuff like that. And so it's like, these things can be published well and sell a lot of copies. And it's just like, it's just challenging. And so it's hard to convince publishers to take a chance on that sometimes. And
I know a lot of, I know a lot of people who would say that like, a novel by an unknown author is like, too much of a gamble, just readers, so, they might try to, read a couple of author's short stories before to just genuinely see if, they like what the writer does. So, I mean, that's, I think like single author collections are marvelous. So I mean, and there definitely should be more of them. So I'm kind of I'm kind of surprised to hear that there's some kind of bias against them or something.
Against it.
Yeah. So because I mean they really sort of give you the chance to sort of show off your variety as an author. You don't have to write a novel is a single story or many stories interwoven, but short stories are just they can show what an author can do, and that's fantastic.
I think that anthologies in particular have a really devoted fan base because everyone who I've ever seen who has one issue of like a monthly anthology has all of them. You never see anyone who just has one Best American Science Fiction or something. It's always like they have a complete bookshelf full of them. And I think maybe it's easier to sell novels to just casual readers who don't know anything about the genre, whereas really hardcore fans probably go in for anthologies more than publishers are willing to admit.
Yeah, well, let me just say, Jesse, I mean, as someone who's written short stories and not any novels, like I feel like it's not even so much that there's a bias against short stories, it's just a total lack of awareness that, you tell people that you write short stories and they're just like, what? I don't get it. Like, could you explain that again? Like,
what's a short story?
Yeah.
Well, do you think maybe part of it is that we don't really have serialized short stories in our media anymore? We don't have, newspapers that people write stories in or... things like that.
Yeah,
I mean that probably doesn't help that is absent from like the mainstream. I mean, my hope is that shows like Black Mirror and like the Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams and things like that. There's a Twilight Zone revival coming out that's going to be helmed by Jordan Peele. And so like some of these anthology type shows, like I'm hoping that might get people excited anew in short stories in general, and hopefully they'll realize like, oh, hey, anthologies and collections are places I can get things like that, you know. And the Philip K. Dick one is kind of interesting because I think that's the first time that there's ever been a TV show where it's like it's a single author collection as opposed to just an anthology of works by like all different sorts of people. So I'll be curious to see if people actually sort of become aware of like, oh, I can actually go read that book of all of Philip K. Dick's stories, and hey, there's other authors who have books like that. Like maybe I should look and see if one of these authors that I actually really like already has one of those books. And it's funny. It's like, I think like the where the bias comes from is that you can have a lot of times like there's been authors who are quite popular with their novels, but then and so a publisher is like, oh well, hey, let's go ahead and do a collection of their stories, and then it's like the collection sells a tiny fraction of what the novels sell, even if like they're a big famous author. I mean, I think there's certainly exceptions. Stephen King's collections seem to sell very well. I mean, he's certainly done plenty of them. And like
I was actually going to bring up Stephen King.
Yeah,
because there was an adaptation of his short stories as, I don't know if it was a mini-series. I think they did a Nightmares and Dreamscapes television adaptation a while back, and I think it either didn't sell very well or wasn't viewed a lot or just wasn't really good. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I remember I had a DVD of it, and I watched a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I thought that was a little bit uneven, but I mean, I thought there was several of them that were quite good. So I mean, yeah, that was actually a pretty good attempt to do that.
I'm trying to remember that show. There was another show that did adaptations. I think David, you mentioned it when they did Sand Kings by George Martin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was The Outer Limits.
Yeah, Outer Limits. That's what it was. Were those based on short stories or?
No, I think most of them were original screenplays, but some of them were adaptations of stories.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, it was a mix on there. And that's always been my complaint about those anthology shows. It's like, well, I mean, sure, you could just do original stories, but the thing is that there's this huge wealth of science fiction short stories that you could just adapt, and likely the world building and everything has been better worked out than because I mean, I don't know, it's like I wouldn't expect people who are screenwriters who don't specialize in science fiction to know science fiction as well as like a science fiction writer who like lives and breathes science fiction. So, if they come up with like a cool idea, I wouldn't expect it to be as fully realized as like what like a science fiction short story necessarily would. So I mean, it's like kind of a unlevel playing field, but they're doing it to themselves. They don't need to do that. Just find something great to adapt. It's not like anyone's going to even notice. Like if you're worried about your ego, no one's even going to notice that it was based on a story. They're just going to know whether or not the episode was good. I mean, that's a little sad side note that it's like, oh well, yeah. I mean, sure, if your story gets adapted, that's great, but no one's going to care or know about it or anything. They're not going to like go buy your books probably.
I have to say, I've always been really astounded by the skill it takes to write short stories. As a writer, it's not an ability that I've ever had. When I was in high school, I think for both my creative writing courses that I took in high school, our final project was to write a short story. Mm-hmm. And both times I started writing novels and couldn't finish them. Right. I'm one of those writers who has to spend so long just delving into the characters and the environment that I have to go back afterward and cut a bunch of it out just so that it's not boring to read. So I'm really just amazed by people who are able to build a whole world within 20, 30 pages.
Mm-hmm.
Are you guys writing or submitting fiction or anything?
Oh. Can I just jump in real quick before you go there, Dave? Before we get too far afield of what sparked this, which was your short stories, and I know you don't mind talking about your short stories. I know you're proud of them and everything, but I was just gonna say, like, given this is episode 300 and everything, it's like that's actually my one I feel like just the one downside of Geek's Guide is that it's completely subsumed your creative life. And like you haven't really written short stories. I mean, you wrote a few in the early days still after we started Geek's Guide, but since you really devoted yourself to it and made it like sort of like your full-time gig, it's like you haven't written any short stories, and I feel sad about that because I was like, well, I mean, I really liked your short stories, and I felt like you were writing short stories unlike what other people were doing. Like nobody, I mean, or better to say nobody was writing stories like the way you write stories, so like you had this unique, sort of style or viewpoint or whatever. Like, you were doing interesting things that I wasn't finding out elsewhere. And so that's been my one, sort of big, sadness about the show is that it has prevented you from writing more short stories. So I would hope that someday you'd be able to get to do it again. But, I know it takes a lot of mental energy to do the show.
I already gave him a short story idea before we even started. It's the Cats and Victory sequel with Oryx.
I think it would be interesting. So many of the recurring panelists on the show and friends of the show are writers that I think there could be something to putting together a Geek's Guide to the Galaxy anthology of just people who have been featured on the show and David and David's friends. And because so many people who are on the show write short stories that I think a short story collection from guests would actually be a pretty good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that could actually be a good thing for the Geeks Guide Patreon. Like if we got together some sort of collection that people could go get as a reward to.
I'd be down with it. I want to say awesome. I feel a little guilty because I've only ever read one of David's short stories. I think it was called "Save Me, Please."
Oh yeah,
am I
that's
right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I really liked it, but I was afraid to read any more because I like David so much that, you know how sometimes you have a friend who's an artist and you're afraid you're not going to like their art and it's going to make it weird? So I was super terrified, and then after I read that one short story, I was like, oh, good. He's a good writer. I don't have to be scared now. But I haven't gone back and read anything else that he's written yet.
Well, actually, let me just address John's thing there, because I was thinking about this yesterday because, when I was younger, I sort of imagined that what I wanted to be is I wanted to be a science fiction writer. And I sort of imagined that being a science fiction writer, I would be on TV talking about current events and stuff, and everyone would be interested in my opinion. And because
you'll go on Bill Maher.
Yeah, because I would see, exactly, because I would see like Harlan Ellison on Bill Maher, and I had read Asimov's autobiography where he talked a lot. It seemed like he was really a public intellectual and commentator and stuff. And I sort of got to the point where I was like, oh, actually, in the current cultural landscape, nobody asks science fiction writers about their opinions, particularly. And that's important to me. And so, I sort of felt like I had to
except on this show.
That's because the present is become so science fictional that everyone is sort of like
we're all living in an alternate dimension anyway, so.
No, not particularly alternative, but I mean it's pretty science fictional. I mean, like William Gibson already said, I don't remember where, but like he said that like if you want science fiction, just open up a copy of Vogue or something. I mean, it's just like it's pretty crazy. The future is really here. I mean,
but I feel like there's a lot of conversations that should be happening in the mainstream media that really aren't, and I felt like I had to build the platform if I wanted to have any kind of actual talk about those things at length in any substantial way. Yeah. I would have to build a platform myself to do it. So that's kind of where my attention has been, because that was always part of the plan.
Well, there used to be a time when writers were respected public figures who were they were deferred to on public matters and asked questions. And now we've reached a place where writers sort of exist in their own little bubble and public commentators exist in their own little bubble, and never the twain shall meet. And I think maybe we should try and break down those barriers somehow. I don't know how to go about it, but
yeah, well, that's what I'm doing. And let me just say also on John's point, I mean, one of the things because I always wanted to be a short story writer. I grew up reading Asimov, talking about visiting John W. Campbell and all this kind of stuff. And then I just sort of got to the point where I was like, well, I love writing short stories and I love reading short stories, but you submit them and it takes like months to get a response, and then it takes like years for them to get published, and then you don't get paid anything, and then like nobody reads them. So it's kind of like, there's like so many everything except the writing part sucks about short stories. So, I kind of felt like, if I had Geek's Guide as a platform, maybe...
Wait a minute. Wait. So, didn't I'm sorry to interrupt you, but, didn't Philip K. Dick do that thing where he just, took 3 or 4 of his, short stories that were maybe some of them even already published, and then just, put them all together and had, a novel? Maybe you can do that. I mean, write novels that are condensed versions of different short stories.
I feel like you could do that in the 60s and 70s because there was a demand for there was such a demand for fiction because there wasn't the internet and all that stuff competing with it. I don't feel like mashing up 3 short stories into novels and putting them out 5 times a year like Philip K. Dick did really has a place in the current marketplace, or would be successful in the current marketplace. But yeah, so that's there's that. I felt like I was going to say something else, but now I don't remember. But I don't know. I want to get Crissy back in here.
Yeah.
Crissy, do you have any? I don't know. Do Do you have any questions you always want to ask about Geek's Guide to the Galaxy, or anything you think we should talk about, or anything you want to let people know about, or anything at all?
Oh, God. I didn't expect to be put on the spot. I don't really. I just enjoy listening to everything and then, I mean, kind of taking it in. I don't get, like I said earlier, I don't get the chance to really sit down and read because I'm constantly working on something. So the only times I get to hear stories are, if Tyler and I are on a trip, we'll put on a audio book or, short stories on podcasts and stuff like that. So it's nice just to hear the conversations that I'm not getting to have, I guess, organically from the things that I'm reading on my own. And then, it's a lot of, short stories being turned into shows and short series. So it's interesting just getting to hear the other perspectives of it from you guys.
You said, Crissy, that you're more focused on movies and TV stuff?
Just because I don't have I work like, as soon as I get home, I start working on more projects. So I don't ever have the time to sit down and just read anything. But, I can sit down and take an hour out of my day and watch an episode of something or watch a movie or put on something while I'm working.
Have you watched anything lately that you thought was really good?
What did we watch?
You've watched every single Star Trek episode.
I've watched every Star Trek episode so many times.
Yeah.
I have done that. What was the movie we went and saw the other day?
Annihilation?
Annihilation, yeah. We went and saw that the other day, and then Tyler went and saw it like 4 more times. I
saw it 3 times. Yeah.
It's really good, but Tyler was telling me, it's not like the book. It's completely, not completely different, but he was telling me a lot of the differences between it and the book, and it's always like, damn it, I want to know what these differences are, for myself. So I just gotta constantly listen to podcasts. That works. I just need to switch to more books on tape, I think.
Yeah, for one thing, the film is like a standalone from what I hear. I haven't seen it yet, but the book is just like the first part in a trilogy. So so it sets up a lot of things to come. But the film, I understand, is like a self-contained story.
Yeah. Well, so Tyler, you went and saw it 4 times?
No, I saw it 3 times.
Oh.
3 times. Yeah, well, so I did too. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to listen to episode 298. Yeah, it was pretty recent, but yeah, we had a 2-hour conversation about Annihilation, and we go through all the differences between the book and the movie. So
I'm looking forward to hearing that episode.
I have downloaded it, but not listened to it yet.
Yeah. I just saw a snippet where it was like, "Don't see this movie on drugs."
Yeah.
We immediately decided we should see it on drugs. As soon as we watched it.
It's pretty heavy. But yeah, I thought it was just so alluring, the movie, and my mouth was agape for like a few of the scenes.
Definitely.
And I hadn't seen that on screen in such a long time, or if ever, but I don't know, there's something about it that just kept drawing me back in.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I mean, Jesse, you mentioned that there are like all the different people who have appeared who are sort of regular guests on the show. I'm just curious if you guys, are there people who are repeat guests who stick out in your minds who you like look forward to seeing again, or do they all just kind of blend together?
I love hearing Matt London. I don't actually know what Matt London does. I don't know if he's a writer. I just know I hear him a lot on the show, and I always enjoy when he's on panels. I
agree with that. I don't know who Matt London is, but he's a pleasure to listen to.
Exactly.
Oh, well, I'm sure he's going to love to hear that. It's like, all of my efforts to promote my brand has been really great at going on Geek Guide to the Galaxy.
Well, I mean, Matt hasn't actually been on the podcast for a long time because he got a job that's been keeping him really busy, and I'm 99% sure I'm allowed to talk about it now. For a long time, we weren't allowed to talk about it, but he was writing the story for a officially licensed Harry Potter mobile game.
Oh.
And
that's
so he
awesome.
got to like fly out to meet with the J.K. Rowling team and like all kinds of stuff. It's really cool. So we're planning to have him on the show to talk about it at some point. But yeah, that's sort of what he's been up to. Or that's who he is. He has
I also really like when you have people who were interview guests come on for panels. I think Naomi Novik did that 1 or 2 times.
Yeah, and
maybe.
And Paolo did once, and Juno Diaz did once, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of examples of that.
Yeah.
There have been so many. I just want to say though, that there have been so many important figures in like geek culture. Earlier today when I was getting my audio set up, I was telling a couple of my friends that I was going to be on the show, and one or two had heard of the show, and then I think I had a friend who had not heard of it before, and I just gave him a quick list off the top of my head of like influential people who have been on the show, George R.R. Martin, and okay, that's the only one coming to mind at the moment, but I gave him a much more extensive list.
We've done 300 episodes!
And he immediately was... Exactly. And he immediately was like, "Oh, I've really got to go check this out now." I still have it. I said, "Yeah, John Cleese, Jim Butcher, Anne Rice, Ari Salvatore, Amanda Palmer, Steven Pinker," and he was like, "How have I not heard of this before?" So he immediately went
David Cronenberg,
yeah. Mike Mignola, Alex Garland,
yeah. Jeff Vandermeer.
Dave, do you ever just like look at the list and just like go, golly geez, I'm so lucky.
Yeah, well, no,
I've really made it.
Yeah, no, this is like my, like I think John was just saying that he like woke up at, I don't know, 6 and worked until 11:30 or something. That's just my typical day. I mean, I do that literally like every single day working on the podcast. And like, even if I took, I haven't taken a vacation in, I don't know, 7 years or something. Probably more than that, actually.
Wow.
But it's because like, what would I even do on a vacation? Like, I would just work on the podcast,
Now, David...
like my girlfriend Stephanie, like recently, I don't know, like for my last birthday, she's like, "What do you want to do for your birthday?" And I'm like, "I just want to work on the podcast. That's my favorite thing to do." So yeah, I mean, I just love it so much, and I'm and I wouldn't be able to do it without the Patreon support. So like, huge thanks to everyone who's listening. Who's supporting us on. I think
Geek's Guide was the first thing I ever pledged to on Patreon. I think I discovered Patreon through Amanda Palmer when she made hers. Mm-hmm. And then I wasn't able to subscribe at first, and then by the time I actually had some money, I think Geek's Guide was the first thing that I subscribed to. And I've never unsubscribed, so it's been constant this whole time.
Oh, that's awesome.
I wanted to ask you, David, you said, I actually have a couple of questions that I wrote down to ask you, but one that occurred to me is you said several times that you record in a closet. How spacious is this closet? Because I hate to imagine that after all this time, you're still huddled in a corner next to your clothes.
No, I am in fact huddled in the corner next to my clothes. Yeah. Well, because
you need to get a bigger closet and put a desk in there.
Well, my girlfriend Stephanie and I moved in together, like 2 or 3 years ago, and and so like I just have to like work with what I've got in terms of our apartment. I mean, we're in Queens, so it's not like it's like big apartments are extraordinarily expensive. So we don't
exactly.
Have a big apartment. But I mean, it's fine. It's cool. I don't know. I mean, I guess, I don't have a studio or anything. I mean, maybe people complain that the audio quality could be better if I had a big mixing board or something. I don't know. But,
then they can donate to your Patreon and you can get a bigger spot.
I was just going to say, I really enjoyed the interview with Karen Russell. I had never heard of her before, and she just seemed like one of the funnest people to hang out with. And there was that moment where like someone was knocking on the door because she was like in someone's office or something about to get kicked out. But after that interview, I went out and bought a couple of her books and just loved her short stories. So it just goes to show, like, even if you listen to the podcast, for long enough, your reading list will grow abundantly.
She was so funny. Like, I wasn't expecting her to be so funny. Like, I mean, it's hard to tell sometimes from when you're just reading a person's writing, but I mean, it's like, she was a really fun guest.
No, she has just such an ebullient personality, and also it's funny because Stephanie and I, my girlfriend and I, met at a Karen Russell reading.
Nice.
So we joke that we might have her, like, try to ask her to officiate at our wedding or something like that.
That's fantastic.
Because it seems like she'd do it. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but it seems like the sort of thing she would do.
Yeah. I think she did move away from New York, though, didn't she? So it would be a little bit more difficult than it would have been otherwise. But yeah.
Juhan, do you have any questions you want to ask?
No, more like a comment. I mean, I just want to say that if I think back on my memories of listening to the show, the one part that like really jumps out is I think it was I was just looking it up. I think it was episode 19. Where like you and John were talking about like mind transfer and stuff like that. So I mean, like the philosophical problems and just the technical and just the moral conundrums of all that. That was like really impressive stuff, and yeah, I really enjoyed listening to that.
No, that was definitely one of our best early episodes, and I think that got us our gig on IO9. I think that episode single-handedly did that.
Oh, wow.
So yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear you say that too, because I love that episode. I really if I was going to think back to a episode to point to, like, that would have certainly been one of my highlights as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting just how science fiction, like, you can't help thinking about philosophical problems like that when you're reading or watching a lot of science fiction. You know, it's just intrinsic to the thought experiment nature of the art form.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would actually love to have you interview some of the Texas weird authors like Joe Lansdale or one of those guys. I think they would be a fun interview.
Or philosophers, who specialize in science fiction. Like Stephen Shaviro or somebody like that. That'd be amazing as well. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Stephen Shaviro?
Yeah. I mean, he's written at least 2 books directly concerned with science fiction. Like, one of them is called Connected. I think it came out in like 2003 or something. But another one is more recent, 2016 or 17, called Discognition, where he talks about like consciousness and awareness and like problems related to that philosophically, but he does that through like analysis of specific like short stories and novels. So things like Blind Sight or let's see now. I don't remember specifically, but yeah. So he discusses different science fiction stories, but in order to sort of get to in order to like discuss broader issues about like cognition and awareness.
I will. Yeah, I am not familiar with him, but I will definitely check that out. I mean, and we've been doing more kind of nonfiction and like experts and philosophers and stuff lately. So I mean, that would sort of fit in with that.
I was going to say, I felt like as soon as he started describing that this author, that all of the neurons in your brains just fired all at once. And you're just like, kind of surprised you were even still conscious after that,
That goes back to the same point that he made about how the more you listen, the bigger your reading list grows. I think at a certain point, my to-read list on Goodreads got so big that I had to make a bookshelf just called Geek's Guide to the Galaxy that had books on it.
Yeah, but it's always good to have like your to-read list be larger than your read list. I find actually because it sort of keeps you engaged and if you're just just proud of all the books that you have read and not searching for anything new, then that gets dull pretty quick. So yeah.
I'm curious I know Tyler gets asked a lot, but I'm curious what everyone here's list is when you have people who are coming into science fiction with, no experience at all, and they're asking you like, hey, I really want to read some good sci-fi. What are your recommendations for like go-to staple books? Tyler's got, he gets asked enough that he like finally like typed it out and he like put it online. I think he put it on like his Facebook. So I'm like, okay, stop asking. Here it is. So I'm curious what everyone else is, what your, even just like your top 3 recommendations would be.
Oh, wow.
John, what do you think about that?
So, I haven't come up with a hardcore list for myself that I would just be my go-to, but if I can go to things that I've done myself, obviously that's something that I've thought about in terms of when I edit anthologies, but I would probably point to Lightspeed or to the Best American series that I've been editing, just because I feel like it gives you this nice depth and breadth of the genre, And I think that the things that I tend to pick are all fairly accessible. I mean, that's one of the things I always try to keep in mind when I'm editing stories or when I'm picking stories for Lightspeed and things like that is I want people who haven't spent their entire life reading science fiction to be able to pick those up and find them accessible. Cause I mean, even once I was a fan, I certainly found some of the sort of core genre anthologies or magazines would frequently publish these stories that I would just bounce off of. I don't know, I don't understand how to access this. It's I found it impenetrable. And it's even with all the science fiction I had read, it's it almost feels like it's you needed a PhD in science fiction in order to, access some of these stories. And I understand some people love that, but, that wasn't, what I wanted to do with the magazine and everything. So anyway, yeah, I mean, I would point to Lightspeed, but, yeah, that would be a much bigger question to try to answer, to think about okay, well, what novels and what, what this and that,
And I think it depends a lot on who's asking. I wouldn't just give somebody a random book. I would say, what do you like to read? And then I would find something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'd do the same.
There's way too many subgenres that could fit in, a niche here for this person, and kind of just
you
depends.
Just have to do a mini interview, so what kind of books do you like? So who are your favorite top 3 non-science fiction authors, and then go from there.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, because sort of like John is saying, a lot of science fiction, a lot of sophisticated science fiction isn't good for people who are new to the genre, because they don't tell you, there'll be robots, but they never say they're robots. You just have to infer that from context. And that's really hard to do if you're, just the idea of a story about a robot is not something that you are even that, familiar with in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I found out, selfishly, shoving books in people's faces that you love is a bad idea. Because I tried to get people to read Perdido Street Station by Chana Mieville. Oh. And that is, his writing is kind of hard for someone that's just getting into science fiction, because it's really weird and his prose is very dense. And so everyone that took that book, I would see them 6 months later. I was like, hey, what'd you think? And they're like, you can have it back. And then I'd give them something, a little lighter, and they would enjoy it. But
and I feel like in a sense I'm the wrong person to ask about this at this point, because there's this whole, I feel like probably the accessible science fiction is YA science fiction, and there's just a million of those things, and I'm not too knowledgeable about. So I teach every summer at this teen writers workshop for aspiring science fiction writers, and there was this big disjunction about 7 years ago or something, where all of a sudden I just had no idea what they were talking about. What books they had read. It was all these YA authors, and I can't keep up with everything. And I think
all it is dystopian vampires. That's all you need to know.
Well, I sometimes feel like YA subgenres are diet versions of actual genres. YA science fiction is sort of sci-fi light with some teens and romance involved.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
A good example of this is I read those The Mortal Instruments. I read the first 3 books a few years ago. I worked at a bookstore, and one of the people I worked with insisted that I read it. She just shoved it in my face. So I read the first 3 books, and I honestly didn't like them very much, but I kind of thought, this is on its way to being an actual fantasy novel, but is sort of it's pulling really hard from video games and other fantasy sources rather than actually making its own world. I mean, it's not really a complaint about that book in general. It's just sort of an observation about teen fiction. Yeah, sometimes authors are forced to kind of tone down the seriousness of their work because publishers think that teens won't be interested in reading hard fantasy or hard sci-fi.
Yeah, and a lot of it's aesthetic science fiction, steampunk was really big when I worked at the library. There were just tons and tons of steampunk books. So it's not really something that you can chew on mentally, but it's just fun, visually, I guess, to imagine.
Yeah. I think something like that also gets popular because you can read a bunch of steampunk and you can visualize this world, and it's so easy to adapt that to your own lifestyle and your own style.
Yeah.
And so it's easier for, you know, people who are even just younger and trying to find their own identity, it's easier to fall into that kind of genre when it's something that you can really make your own and you can literally identify with.
I do think that hard sci-fi and like high fantasy are very daunting. Like for me, I'm, you know, trying to be a fantasy author, and when I read really well-written fantasy, I feel so terrified. I'm like, I cannot possibly build a world that's this detailed and this well-explained and, you know, in such an eloquent way. And I look at my writing and I think this looks like teen fiction in comparison, even though I'm trying really hard to build a world. So it can be very challenging.
Yeah, I mean, as far as just sort of you know, introduction books, I mean, one thing that like Dave, I think I have some challenge with it because of because we're so well versed in it at this point. But I mean, I can think back to what got me into science fiction, and so like I look at you know, books like Jurassic Park and some of other Michael Crichton's other books. That's sort of like what really got me, that was really my gateway to actual science fiction. I mean, those are published outside of science fiction, but so things like that gave me the confidence to try real science fiction, you know, because it's full of science, you know, just like tons of science in those. And then I read like Robert J. Sawyer and Ben Bova, and again, those are both sort of hard science fiction people, but they wrote in such a way that was pretty accessible. Robert J. Sawyer probably more so than Ben Bova, but you know, they're both written in this style that doesn't really assume that you know all this background stuff of science fiction, and like it's going to assume that, like, okay, we're going to tell you everything that you need to know in order to grapple with this. And they deal with, sort of, you know, these different scientific conundrums. And so it's like, I think they're pretty accessible. And then you have people like John Scalzi who are writing, you know, sort of like his Old Man's War series. It's like military SF, but it's written in this really accessible style, and it's very easy to like imagine someone who isn't really familiar with science fiction to like pick that up and just run with it. You know, it's like, you know, pretty easly to follow along with everything. So.
But there's a interesting problem here as well, because isn't like part of science fiction, or what makes it so interesting or different or cool, sometimes like the exact opposite of accessibility. I mean, I like the feeling that I don't understand immediately what the hell is going on, you know, like the author is using, you know, familiar words but in a completely different context, so I need to sort of like figure out what they're doing, and the author is aware of this, so they're sort of, so they have sort of like strategically placed, you know, clues within the text, so that, you know, I reach a certain, you know, page, and then a light bulb goes off. I understand, oh, holy shit, you know, it's actually like this, and, you know, so I have to go back mentally and like reevaluate what I've just read. I mean, I realize that this can be like a horrible challenge, and not fun at all for some, but I mean, that's like, that for me, like, that's one of the like more interesting and cooler things that the science fiction author, or fantasy author for that matter, like, is using like language in a different way. I find that really cool sometimes. So
some authors are really good at immersion very quickly, and then sometimes you just like, I remember I've never actually finished Dune, but I've tried a few times to read it. And the first time I read Dune, I felt really confident that I had a handle on what was happening during like the first or second chapter. And then they started throwing in all these terms that I didn't know what they meant. And at a certain point, I was just so confused by the very
sometimes the learning curve is like too deep. That's very high. Very high. That's like the main complaint that non-science fiction readers give me as well when I try to sort of recommend books, that they're like, oh, you know, the sentences don't make any sense, you know, none of the nouns or verbs are, you know. But
I'm curious, have any of you guys read Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun?
I have not.
I've tried to. This is everyone keeps recommending it to me, and I bought it, and I was really excited. The description sounded awesome, and then I read it, and well, to be glib, it's just like everyone keeps saying that it just gets better and better and better. Like with each reread.
They always say that.
But what they forget to mention is it's not that terribly exciting on the first one. So at least for me, yeah. I mean, I'm sure, I'll it's probably I'm gonna make a complete fool out of myself like saying this publicly, but I'm sure I'll go back to it one day, read it fully, and then realize that it's a work of genius and I'm a moron. But as it is now, I've tried to read it, and it's sort of, it should be the thing that I like or love about SF, but it somehow just hasn't worked for me yet.
Yeah, well, I didn't like it at all the first time I tried to read it, but now I love it, and I've read it 5 times. But it's an acquired taste for sure. There's no doubt about that.
One of my favorite books is Wicked by Gregory Maguire, and I had a friend in high school who was reading it, and I tried to read it in high school, and I actually read the whole thing, but it was his style is so verbose and dense that I really had no clue what was going on. And I was only really vaguely aware of what I was reading. But when I went back and read it later, I actually really loved it, and now it's one of my favorite books. But every time I've tried to recommend it to someone, they usually get really put off by Gregory Maguire's style. So sometimes going back and rereading something after you've matured a little bit, it makes more sense to you then.
How about Tyler or Crissy? Do you guys have any challenging books that you think are worth the effort?
Well, one of the first books that I read when science fiction, like hard science fiction that I read when I was a teenager, was The Gods Themselves by Asimov. And it's told in 3 parts. And the middle part, so the beginning part and the end part have to do with like human scientists. And the middle part is like these light aliens, and like it goes through their mating processes. And I was reading it and I was just like, what the hell is going on? Like, this is the weirdest thing I have ever read. And, towards the end of the book, it all kind of clicks and it kind of makes sense. But after that, I just realized like how weird science fiction books can really get. And now I'm just like ingesting like Jeff Vandermeer and like him and his wife's collections of weird fiction and China Miéville and stuff like that. So I find the hard stuff alluring, I guess, because you don't really know exactly what's going on all the time, and that's kind of what lets your imagination kind of run wild with what you're trying to figure out. So I don't know. I kind of like it now.
I'm a big quitter. If I start reading something and I'm not getting it, I'm just gonna I'm gonna put it down and walk away and just like, it wasn't for me. But I will say that when Tyler first started reading China Miéville, with how like immediately drawn in he was, it took a lot of come on, just read it. Come on, before I finally did. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is pretty fantastic. And it took a vacation out of the entire country before I finally was like able to like sit down and like, okay, I'm going to read this all right now. And it was great, but
was it Unlondon?
I can't remember. Yeah. Like you like the baby one.
Yeah.
But even just getting there and finally like getting past the hurdle of, I've seen him recommend it to so many of our friends, and they're like, no, I don't think so. So I went into it expecting to not be interested.
Yeah.
I'm a big quitter, though, so.
Yeah.
I do agree with Jesse, though. Like, I've tried to read Dune, like, 3 times and just couldn't get through it all. I know it's fascinating. I know it's cool, but just, I don't know. I can't get through it.
There's a YouTuber, Lindsay Ellis, who does these really great film reviews, and she uses Dune as shorthand for when something is too overly complicated and obsessed with its own mythology. She will just randomly intersperse that little girl going, "He is the Kwisatz Haderach," every time something is too complicated to understand.
That's hilarious. Yeah, speaking of Dune, I'm a little disappointed that Denis Villeneuve is going to be, spending his next 2 films making Dune movies instead of, something exciting and interesting. Like, after everything, it's like I mean, I would have been much more interested to see him, adapt almost anything else. But But as far as difficult but rewarding things, I agree with Dave. I love Book of the New Sun, but otherwise, I would put in a plug for Ka by John Crowley, which just came out last year, and I know Dave, you read it recently, and you interviewed Crowley. And that's a book that's like, I mean, honestly, as soon as I read it, I was like, oh my god, this is one of the best things I've ever read in my life. And I just so despaired that I wasn't able to acquire it for my imprint, but I'm very happy it ended up published somewhere else. But I have intense jealousy that I wasn't able to do it. It's just so great. And I mean, it's not even, I wouldn't say it's as challenging as, for instance, Little Big by Crowley or Book of the New Sun. Man, what a fantastic book. Like, I'm sort of, I'm really hoping that's going to get nominated for a World Fantasy Award, because it's like it didn't get nominated for the Nebula, and it's unlikely for the Hugo. And it's like, I mean, not that we care that much about award nominations or whatever, but it's like I want people to pay attention to it. I want it to get attention, and really everyone should read it. So.
This whole conversation really reminds me of something I wanted to say, which is that I've been obsessed with fantasy my whole life, but the funny thing is I've never really, not before this show really, was I introduced to really important fantasy authors like Ursula K. Le Guin and Terry Pratchett, and people who I really hadn't heard of before, and some of them are more lighthearted than others, but my introduction to fantasy was almost entirely through video games. It was through Final Fantasy when I was a kid, and then, other fantasy games, and those are really fantasy light. They really use the verbiage of fantasy and the vocabulary of it without actually really being in a well set up fantasy world. But because of that got me more interested into reading real fantasy that people put a lot more effort into, because, I can't fault a video game for not spending all its time world building, but it is nice to read a book where, that space is there to do that. So I think this show has really helped me to discover a lot of things I wouldn't be trying to read Philip K. Dick right now if I hadn't have found this show.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I want to, before we run out of time, I want to toot our own horn a little bit. I have a couple of things here that have happened recently that have been sort of like Geek's Guide to the Galaxy having an impact or getting a lot of attention or stuff like that. So I don't know if you guys follow me on Facebook, but so our the new show Channel Zero used a quote from us as their blurb in their TV ad.
That's really cool.
There was a beef between Elon Musk and Steven Pinker, where Elon Musk responded to something that Steven Pinker said about him on our show. And I did
I saw that.
Yeah, actually, hold on, I mentioned one thing, and then I interviewed this woman, Jess Phoenix, who's running for Congress, and the headline was, "This scientist wants to bring Star Trek values to Congress," and that became the #1 story on all of Reddit with 80,000 upvotes.
Jeez.
So I just want to.
Do you see upticks in listeners after these events?
Less than you might imagine, because it's really hard. Like if it's an hour or 2 hour podcast, that's not the kind of thing that lots of people just jump on the bandwagon and start listening to just because of one news story or something. But certainly like the Jess Phoenix interview had a much higher than average number of downloads and stuff like that. But no, the basic dynamics of podcasts is that it's really hard to get people to listen to an hour-long podcast is that it's really hard to get people to listen to it. But the people who do listen to it are super loyal because they're just spending so much time listening to you and getting to know you and stuff like that.
I saw you posting about the feud between Elon Musk and Steven Pinker and how you sort of got caught in the middle of it. There were a few articles you posted on Facebook on your wall, I think, that had some mentions of the podcast in it.
Yeah, and CNBC made a little animated video of there's Steven Pinker and Elon Musk in the boxing ring and stuff like that.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I saw that.
Yeah, I was gonna say with the Channel Zero thing, it is kind of a shame that it just credits Wired instead of specifically Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. I think that's sort of bound to happen anytime someone tries to quote Geek's Guide, especially if it's from the post on Wired, as opposed to something that wasn't quoted in the post.
We just have to get bigger than Wired, John, and then that'll.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll happen soon.
Now, we're spending all this time talking about Geek's Guide, but we haven't talked about the new star of Geek's Guide. The elephant in the room is that David has a new kitten.
Yeah. Well, yeah, actually, it's funny, but yeah, so I have a new kitten. We named her Oryx, Oryx. We actually named her after the striped African gazelle type animals. And I wasn't even thinking that it was like Oryx and Crake, but that's what people think about that. And then apparently there's a bad guy in the video game Destiny named Oryx. I'm also not familiar with that either. Yeah, so I started when I post, sometimes I'll post on Facebook and I'll say, here's the next person I'm going to be interviewing. And so now I'll put a picture of the book with my cat, like sitting next to it or something. And those have been really popular.
It's excellent marketing.
Yeah, John, you posted something with a cat in it too. You were kind of like ripping me off there.
I did. I was trying to copy. I was trying to get your cat views. Although I couldn't get my cat to behave as well as yours did. Like, how long did it take you to take those pictures? Like, first of all, those are really like artistically shot pictures. I'm really jealous of the light you have. Like, I can't get any kind of light like that, like in my house. But
he'll set up the book and have it cracked open, and the cat is just like lounging next to it.
Yeah.
Well, no, Oryx is an amazingly like subdued cat. I was telling Tyler before we got started that I just took her in the shower with me this morning. Because I was just taking a shower and she was just standing outside the shower meowing, and so I just picked her up and I was like petting her and like put her on the little windowsill and stuff, and she's totally cool.
There's another podcaster called, his name's Michael Marshall, and he has a skeptical podcast that's based in the UK, and he got a kitten at the same time as you did, and I think because I both sort of think of you as sort of like these atheist kind of activists, that I kept getting your cats confused. So every time one of you posts a picture of the cat, I can't remember which one of you has which cat.
Actually, that reminds me of something. So we think Oryx is just the most perfect cat ever. But Stephanie had posted a picture, and one of her friends on Facebook said, I noticed a problem with your cat. She doesn't have, like a flaw in your cat. She doesn't have a perfect M on her forehead. And apparently tabbies are supposed to have like a perfect M on their forehead. And so I'd never heard of this before, but so I was looking it up.
She's actually... Oryx's M is imperfect because she's the chosen one, so...
Wait, you're getting a little ahead of me there, Jesse. But so one of the stories for why tabbies have an M on their forehead is because there's this story that, like, I forget what it was, like a cat saved the Prophet Muhammad or something like that, and so he like drew a little M on its head. Ever since tabbies have had M's on their head. And so I was like, well, maybe because Oryx is an atheist cat, she doesn't have the M on her forehead.
That's fantastic.
And so, yeah, so awesome. I'm tempted to just refer to her consistently as Oryx the Atheist Cat on Facebook.
Yeah.
I haven't started.
It has a nice ring to it.
I think she should have her own fan page called Oryx the Atheist.
I was. That sounds like a TV show. You know?
Yeah.
Needs a jingle.
She just goes around like Wishbone style, debunking religious arguments.
Retweeting Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins.
Yeah. I've been really impressed with like what you guys have been doing with her, like making her an adventure cat and everything. You got the harness on her, taking her out and walking her and everything. Like that's really cool. Like I'm kind of jealous. My cats don't do anything cool like that.
Yeah, so I have a little leash and harness, and I take her out to the park every day, pretty much. And I take her out to the woods, and she climbs trees and stuff like that. It's really But I've been doing it ever since like the first day we got her, and I do it every day. So got to keep them trained like that.
I wanted to say, David, since you brought up Oryx being an atheist cat, that I really wanted to thank you for, you're an atheist, and it's important to you, but you also, I enjoy the fact that you don't shy away from mentioning it whenever you're talking to guests, and that it hasn't been something that, it's not a central focus of the show, and it's not intended to, repel religious listeners, but I also like that you haven't hidden it or, tried to downplay it at all.
No, thank you. And I mean, I was inspired by Isaac Asimov and Douglas Adams, who, I feel like I'm just kind of doing the same thing that they did.
Well, yeah, I think it's really good to have, vocal atheists who are doing, and also to have, atheists who are doing things that aren't just atheist related. You're your main focus is science fiction and fantasy, and you just happen to also be an atheist, and I think it's really cool that while at the same time you're not downplaying being an atheist, you're also, you also are just a person who happens to be an atheist. So anyway, I just think it's good to have strong voices.
Yeah, I mean, well, because I think, I think what you're getting at is that, like people who are just known for being, atheist advocates or whatever, it's like, they're going to be speaking to a, sort of a self-selected audience.
Yeah.
It's like they're not going to really be reaching, maybe the people who they would want to be reaching, as much as they would otherwise. Whereas like Dave, maybe, with the Geek Sky platform, being more, general, maybe it'll convince. I mean, that's sort of the one thing that you sort of hope with science fiction a lot is that like, oh, maybe, or I guess any kind of stories really, but like if you put certain kinds of representation in stories, or, you address certain issues, maybe you can hope to reach somebody who will encounter that and start thinking about whatever that issue is in a different way. Like, if you can do it effectively, and, Geek Sky is just another way to try to do that, I think, too.
Well, let me just say, John, too, is that, I've had people post reviews on iTunes where they're like, I'm a conservative Christian and I listen to this show and like, I don't always agree with it, but it's interesting, and I think that's really good. And I think there's because I listen to podcasts where I don't agree with what they're saying, but it's interesting, and I think there's just such a problem in our society today where like, if you only agree with me on politics 95%, you're horrible. I can't even stand to see you. And so I just appreciate when people post comments like that. But actually, Zach, you mentioned, Jesse, you mentioned other podcasters. You'll see that Zach is coming in a second here. Zach Chapman, who was in episode 200 and has been on the show a couple times since. Is one of several of our regular people who have started their own podcasts. So I want to give them a shout out. So Zach Chapman sort of helped start a podcast. It's called it's called Books and Beer, and it's part of a broader podcast umbrella called One of Us. So if you like that, if you like books and beer, I guess check that out. And then Rajan Khanna started one called Spirited Discourse, where they drink wine, I think, and talk about fantasy and science fiction. So I don't know what it says that so many of our people. I'm
going to be honest. I will probably listen to it because I had a bit of a crush on Zach's voice whenever I heard it in episode 200.
Yeah, and we have to chat about San Antonio versus Austin, so I think I'll have to join as well.
Well, actually, let me
do it over a beer.
Let me just mention, and then like Anthony Ha has one on TechCrunch called Original Content. But Tyler, you should totally get in touch with Zach. You guys should totally hang out.
We have mutual friends on Facebook, so we probably have crossed paths at some point.
Yeah. We weren't being creepy or anything.
Do you guys ever go to Austin? Because there's a fair amount of cool science fiction stuff in Austin.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I'm actually going there on Tuesday. I go there a lot for music shows, and they have one of the best comic book stores in the area, so...
There's a list of like places we always, if you're going to Austin, you have to go to this comic book store, and then you have to go get a pastrami sandwich from.
Well, and Book People's a good bookstore too, right?
Book People's great.
That's still there, right?
Yeah. It's great. Well, we have these stores called Half Price Books that are fantastic for finding treasures. And then they have Austin Books and Comics, which it's literally like 4 different buildings that's owned by the same family. One's like a comic book store, one's a discount comic book store, they have a toy store, a gaming store. It's just like they have the whole gamut of nerdery on this one corner.
Small compound.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, am I correct in that there's no like big independent bookstore in San Antonio? Because when I was there, I was asking, I was staying with my niece who lived just outside of town. And she didn't know of anything. I mean, like there was some Barnes and Nobles, or there was at least one that we went to, but she didn't know of any sort of independent bookstores. Is there anything that you know of?
There's a couple, but they're not very big. We have one called Twig. But I mean, I went to their science fiction and fantasy section and just was guffawing because it was pathetic. But
they carry a lot more local artists and Texas history. Yeah. They're in a very touristy area.
Oh, okay.
But there's a couple that double as like music venues.
I've honestly I live in South Carolina, and mostly I haven't seen any independent bookstores. It's mostly used bookstores. there's usually a lot of those, and I think as more big name bookstores, unfortunately shut down, it does kind of create a bigger market for local used bookstores, which is a good thing. But I think that there also should be more of a push for actual local bookstores that are ordering new books.
Yeah.
We were just in Asheville, North Carolina, and y'all had some really cool Asheville. Like independent places. But Asheville's just full of crazy people.
Asheville is kind of this like hippie mecca up in the mountains. It's just like a great place for anybody who's weird and different, or it's a really great place for gay people and nerds, and there's just lots of coffee shops, and it's a really cool place.
Yeah, it's like the Austin of North Carolina, right?
Yeah. It genuinely is. I think it's ranked it's on like one of the top 5 gay friendliest places in the US to go to.
Mm-hmm.
There was definitely a bookstore. It was like a used bookstore / champagne bar, and then it had a specialty cheese shop attached to it. It was like, this is the greatest collaboration I've ever seen in my life. Spent too much time.
Yeah, there are like vegan grocery stores and things there.
Yeah, actually, my girlfriend's parents are in the process of moving to Asheville, so I've been down there.
Oh.
I think once, maybe twice. I forget, but I'm definitely going to.
Oh, when you come out, I'll have to hang out with you.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, next time.
Because I'm only a couple of hours from Asheville.
It was beautiful.
Totally. I will drop you a line next time we go there. That'll be awesome.
Yeah, where in South Carolina are you?
I live in a place called Lake Wylie, which is right on the border of North Carolina. So basically, I had a friend who posted a joke about this the other day. If you live anywhere near Charlotte, you basically just say, I live in Charlotte. Because whenever someone asks where you live, you'll say, "Oh, I live in Lake Wylie. It's near Rock Hill, and it's Charlotte. It's Charlotte. I was born in the stadium, and Cam Newton is my father."
Yeah, I was just asking because I was in Charleston, 2 years ago, and when I was in Myrtle Beach, a friend of mine lives. Our friend Chris Tabasco, Dave and I, my friend, he lives in Myrtle Beach now. So
people who are not from the Carolinas, really have this fascination with Myrtle Beach that people who have been there every year their whole life, like me, do not.
Right.
I've been there so many times that's just what a beach is like to me in my head now. I just think of Myrtle Beach, so I should probably visit some other beaches to see how they differ.
Well, so Jesse, have you been to this place? Because Stephanie really wants to. One of her bucket list things is to pet as many dangerous animals when they're babies, like furry, only furry ones, but like
that's
tigers
fantastic.
And polar bears or whatever, like before they can hurt you, when you can just pet them. And so apparently it turns out that there's a place where you can do that, like around Myrtle Beach somewhere that we're talking about going. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
I've never heard of this. It's not in Ripley's Believe It or Not, is it?
I don't...
Because there's a Ripley's Believe It or Not there, and it's basically just like a museum of weird, strange things. Like outside there's like a giant ball that weighs like a ton, and it's in a fountain, and it's constantly got water flowing over it so you can turn it. So I don't know if it's there. It's probably something completely separate.
I think it's like some sort of park / petting zoo kind of place where you can like pet baby tigers and stuff like that.
I don't know, but I'm really interested now. Now that you've mentioned it, I want to find out.
All right, so we should probably start wrapping this up pretty soon, but I do want to just like red alert, like The Expanse season 3 is starting in April. So I hope everyone, all you guys, I hope you're all watching The Expanse. Although Jesse, we have somehow not been able to persuade to read Game of Thrones, so I don't know what.
Yeah,
I'm reading. I do. I have the first book. I have it, and I've read the prologue in the first chapter, and I didn't dislike it. I just have been reading other things, so I'm sure eventually I will get around to reading it. I'll probably get sucked in like everyone else does.
Yeah, it's
I do
great.
think it's funny that it's David Barr Kirtley's personal mission to get everyone to watch The Expanse. He's trying single-handedly to make sure this show never goes off the air.
I've read all the books, but I think I've only seen season 1.
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoyed it. I thought they did a really good job.
Juhan, were you saying something?
No, I was about to say that a controversial statement that I think the first book of A Song of Ice and Fire is the best one, but now that I've said it, I'm not sure if I agree with that.
Get ready for the tweets.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think that's
that controversial.
That's a fair statement. I would say either Game of Thrones or Storm of Swords.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's clearly one of those two, I would think.
Yeah, that's true.
I agree with whatever you guys say.
So wait, are you guys all watching The Expanse, though? Tell me you're all watching The Expanse.
I'm not.
This doesn't bode very well for you. I have not watched it yet, but I listened to your interview with the showrunner of Expanse, and I thought it was really interesting, so I do plan to watch it soon.
All right, well, watch it before it gets canceled. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, if you don't watch it soon, but you do trust Dave enough and you have $20, just buy the season on iTunes or whatever, or Amazon or whatever. So at least then they're counting you as having seen it, whether you've watched it or not.
Do it as a personal favor to David.
Yes.
Isn't $20 worth after all the joy I've brought into your life?
Yes.
It's $20.
Exactly. After everything he's done for you, you can save The Expanse. Come on.
Or actually, the first season's on Amazon Prime, so if you already subscribed to that, you can actually just go and put it on your TV and then walk away. You don't have to watch it, just play it and let it play all the episodes, and then that way all those will get counted as watched, and you can contribute that way.
I think it's on Netflix as well.
Yeah, it depends on which part of the world you're in. Yeah, I think outside the United States, I think it's on Netflix, and then in the United States on Amazon.
Oh, all right.
Lucky Estonians.
Yeah,
the Estonians get all the breaks.
I wish it was on Netflix. To be honest, it would be easier, but still.
Dave, I know that we're wrapping up soon, but I got to ask you everything that I had on my list, but there's one thing that I wanted to mention, which is that probably one of my favorite episodes of the show was your interview with Margaret Atwood, because she was flirting her ass off with you the entire episode, and I thought it was hilarious. If you go back and listen, Margaret Atwood was flirting with David so hard.
Yeah, Stephanie says the same thing, actually.
I asked David about it after I listened to it, and yeah, he said the same thing. He had no idea, but Stephanie apparently agrees with me. So if you want to have a chuckle, go listen to Margaret Atwood just all over David.
Yeah, and before we close, I will say that, David, your interview style is incredible. You do so much research beforehand. I feel like there's been guests that were like, where the hell did you find this information? So you obviously take a lot of time and effort into each episode. It's very much appreciated for the listener.
I really appreciate that David lets people talk, and he will give them an open-ended question and let them answer the question, and then offer comment and then move on to the next question, because a lot of interviewers will spend the entire interview just talking about a personal story that relates to them, which can be entertaining, but I appreciate that David lets people speak for themselves.
Before we started recording, people were sort of joking, oh, let's do our David impression, and somebody said, oh, I'm really excited even though you can't tell. Wait, who was that? Who said that?
Okay, I admit that was me.
Okay.
When I first started listening, I genuinely, I think it was something about the tone in the earlier episodes where I don't know if you were nervous or if it was just the way you were speaking, but it sounded like, I don't know, you kind of backed away whenever you were excited about something, and you tried so hard to sound professional that you ended up sounding slightly uninterested. And I think I remember asking you about it, and you said, no, that's just the way that I sound sometimes.
Yeah, well, and I was super nervous, for sure. And,
yeah, that's what I figured.
And I never had any I never did performance or acting or, I just sat in my room by myself reading books. So, I mean, I kind of...
I promise it was just a friendly jab.
It's something I'm working on it, though. I'm working on it.
I think you do just fine. I think if you were to change your style, people would be unhappy. So I think you should keep going with the way that's natural to you.
Well, because somebody posted a mean review the other day where it said, I stopped listening to this 5 years ago because the host is so terrible, and I just tried it again, and it's still just as horrible as it was. And
Jesus.
I totally think.
Well, they can fuck off.
I think I'm at least 10% less terrible than I was 5 years ago.
So the important takeaway from episode 300 is that person can fuck off.
Everyone agree?
Yeah, I agree.
We have a quorum.
Whenever I first started listening to the show a lot, I posted a review, and David read my review, and I remember I was so giddy. I was like, oh my god, that's what I wrote!
And now you're on the show. How about that?
I know, what a strange journey it's been to this point.
Dreams do
I feel I've accomplished so much.
All right, so cool. Yeah, so we should wrap this up because it's like almost 2 hours now. So anyone?
Well, can I just?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Can I just ask a question? So when Margaret Atwood was flirting with you, like, do you know? Did she see pics of you in high school with your Rambo physique? Or,
Maybe that's what it was.
I am gonna assume no. I mean, it's like most people know absolutely nothing about the show. Like to a staggering degree when they come on. Like 80% of the people I get on the phone with them and I say like, okay, just to confirm, I said this in the email multiple times, but just to confirm, you realize this is an hour, right? And 80% of them are like, what, an hour? So like, the idea that they've done any sort of background research on me is, I think highly unlikely.
Yeah. I remember you, I won't say who it was, but I remember there was one person you got on the phone and he was like, so how long is this? And you were like, an hour. And he just got like really quiet. Cause like clearly his assistant had set it up or whatever. Yeah. And then, he thought it was going to be like 10 minutes or 50 or half an hour or something. And it was like, an hour?
I think you said it in one episode that there was an interview that went so badly because someone was like in a hotel room and they kept opening doors and They were just completely uninterested, and you had to try and piece together something out of all of their, not paying attention to you.
No, see, Jesse, that wasn't on an episode. I told that to you privately, that you were supposed to keep secret.
Oh, never mind.
But no, that's fine.
Never mind, that never happened.
But yeah, there have been 2 interviews that we were not able to use because of, they just went so badly. But, 2 out of 300, that's not bad.
That's pretty good.
And
David,
and the chances of those people actually listening to this episode is pretty much nil. So
well, especially making it to this point. If they've listened this far, then congratulations.
Yeah. It's like they were so scarred by the fact that we never ran those episodes. They're like listening dutifully to every.
They're waiting for mentions.
Oh my god, they mentioned me. They just mentioned me, but they're just talking about me because it was terrible. Oh no, I feel bad again.
Yeah, they just listen every week. They're like, I'm sure my interview is going to appear one of these weeks.
It's been a while. He must be really working on editing it.
Yeah.
David, in episode 200, you mentioned that your white whale was Neil Gaiman, and you've got him on the show now. I know you've also said that Stephen King would be a dream to get on the show. Since it is episode 300 and we're looking toward the future, is there anyone other than Stephen King that you really hope to eventually get on the show one day?
Was it us?
It was Crissy.
Apart from us, of course. Yeah, just us.
I mean, there are a bunch of people
maybe J.K. Rowling or something.
Oh, that would be really cool. Well, yeah, there are a lot of people that we've tried to get that we haven't been able to get. I mean, after the Elon Musk, Steven Pinker flap, I tried to get Elon Musk to come on and rebut Steven Pinker. I guess he's busy.
And we tried to get him before too, and never got anywhere.
I mean, Salman Rushdie, I want to really get. Colson Whitehead and Ta-Nehisi Coates, we tried to get recently, and they were just their schedule didn't work out. But I mean, we got, by the time we get around to episode 400, hopefully we'll, Elon Musk, he's my next white whale. We'll get him. We're going to get him.
There you go. You can interview him in space in that car.
Are there any plans to interview, like, Samuel Delaney, for instance? Like, he's one of, the classic new wave authors who who would be amazing. I'm sure, like, to listen to. I don't know, is it on the cards or like, have you thought about it?
Well, actually, Samuel R. Delaney, he had a birthday party event.
Oh,
and I went to it and talked to him about it. And he, he said he doesn't really do a lot of interviews. I actually talked to a woman who's writing a biography about him, and she's not been able to get him to sit down for an interview. So I figure, that gives you an idea of how difficult it is. But I mean, I gave him my card, and anytime he wants to come on the show, I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I think that's. I don't know. Any other final thoughts?
Thanks for everything you do.
Yeah, it's been an honor to be on this show.
Yeah, me too.
Definitely is an honor to be on it. Just keep doing what you're doing. This is just constantly just great conversations, great topics, and like they said, you have a great interview style, so it's always interesting.
I hope that one day, if I'm an actual published author, I can come on as an interview.
Yeah, no, definitely. Just keep writing, keep getting published. I would definitely, consider that.
So here's to another 300 episodes.
Yeah.
Huzzah!
300 more. David, you're never allowed to sleep again.
All right, so I think we're going to wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with John Joseph Adams, Jesse Colton, Tyler and Crissy Lutz, and Juhan Raud. So guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Always good to be here.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Jesse Colton, Tyler Lutz, Crissy Lutz, and Juhan Raud for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to Stephanie Simpson and Frederick Lane, who both just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.